What we've concentrated on is following the path of the dollars from top bank executives to the GOP and from the GOP to this photo ID amendment. You can see that path for yourself. And what we see is a clear link between the dollars that top bank executives are investing and this photo ID amendment. First of all, the money that banks are spending dwarfs the dollars candidates themselves are raising. Top of that list, Roger Crawford. Total independent expenditures on his behalf, $70,000. Total contributions, dollars he raised, $15,000. Total independent expenditures, total money from banks, $39,000, almost $40,000. That's almost half of all the money spent on his behalf coming from banks. That's the sort of extraordinary influence that we see. And you can see on this list that those that have been part of the takeover recently in the Minnesota legislature, on this list, upwards of 1/3 to half of the resources being spent on their behalf are coming from these banking institutions. The real conversation we need to be having in our state is who stands to gain from a photo ID amendment. Clearly, the executives of our largest banks, Wells Fargo, TCF, US Bank, all have a vested interest in reducing the voter rolls. Those that suffer the most from a cuts-only approach to governing that is funded by top bank executives and implemented by the legislative Republicans are the same people who suffer the most under a photo ID amendment. We're asking for two things. First, that the bankers who profited from crashing our economy stop flooding our elections with money and stop using that money to rewrite the rules of the game to benefit themselves. Secondly, we're asking that legislators turn their attention to creating jobs and stop trying to restrict the vote.
These are some pretty heady allegations saying that, these banks are trying to restrict votes and restrict voters from access to the polls. I mean, couldn't they make the argument that they want a better business climate and Republicans are more in line with their beliefs, that perhaps they want lesser regulations, which Republicans are pushing? Couldn't this be, an argument that's made on any issue that Republicans are backing? And why are you using it on this?
I think money in politics is about cause and effect. And the effect of the dollars that the banks in Minnesota are investing, right, the top executives of these banks, is to move a photo ID amendment that is restricting the right to vote. In order for the banks to move their agenda, they've now decided that they need to rewrite the rules of the game to benefit themselves. And that's what photo ID is. It's an attempt to fundamentally change the rules of our democracy to benefit the wealthiest and the most powerful. There's never been a case of voter impersonation in Minnesota. So it begs the question, well, if there's no problem to be solved, why are we even having a discussion in our state about photo ID? It's coming from somewhere, and someone's funding it. What you can see is that bank executives, who may have a broad agenda, I wouldn't deny that for a second, I'm sure they have multiple self-interests, are moving an agenda that, in part, is about restricting access to the polls.
In part.